All right.
Oh.
So let's jump right in. 61 years later, the murder of Catherine Blackburn has now been solved. I would say, unfortunately, the suspect is deceased, so not much can happen from here now. But let's talk about how this happened.
So when we first started our program in 2018, we had the press announcement in November. And then a week later, I got a phone call. I picked up the phone. I heard on the phone, "Are you Dr. Christina Lane?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." And he goes, "Well, it took a long time trying to get a hold of you." And I'm like, "Uh-oh."
This is not good.
Yeah, but no, it's funny, it wasn't bad, right? And then it was Sandy Carmichael. And for understanding about how persistent she is from when we actually got the case, her name is throughout the case, throughout the years, following through, saying, "Has anything been done? What needs to get done? I want to solve this case for my aunt." So because I would say excellent timing, we just started the partnership with Albany Police. And I reached out, and the person who was our liaison then was Lieutenant Al Martin. He is retired now, but wonderful, very terrific officer. But he retired. But he said, "Okay, this is great. We got a family here. We got a crime that happened in the Albany area. So let's see if I could pull this case. And then we'll meet next week." Like, he was really fast about it, right? And then he tries to pull the case, and he's like, "It's missing. Where is it?" Okay. And he couldn't find the case files. And then he found out a person back then, Sergeant Melissa Morey, had the case file. Now, Melissa had the case file because there was already interest in the case. Officers would talk about it at gatherings, because this case is very unique, that because it has a lot of organized criminal traits and something that you would only basically see happen and which you would see on TV. So she already had the case. And so this is how Melissa got involved with us, which is terrific. And she's still with us today. Yeah. And now she's not sergeant anymore. She is commander, soon to be more. And so we had the meeting. So it was the first introductory meeting with the family. And so we had the family members, the two nieces were there. One was Sandy Carmichael and the other one was Barbara Ulmer. And they were both there, and they talked about the case. They brought some items, and Melissa and Al were there too. And Al was sitting there and asking, "So what do you want us to do?" And Albany PD, since they just first started the partnership with this idea of actually utilizing academics and college students to assist. And so they said this would be a good start. The case is old, right? So there's no chance of getting into issue or trouble with students knowing the suspect and other issues.
Well, that's what I was thinking, that the fact that that one was so old, it was like safe to give to the students to start out.
Absolutely. That's the kind of thing that makes me chuckle too.
Yeah.
And
then look what happened.
Yeah, and after that, and all of us, Chris, Melissa and I, we all said, this is such a horrific case. We have to solve this. This is something that needs resolution. You can't walk away from this, because if this was the case today, it would have been solved immediately. But please remember, the Albany Police were working on it. Yeah. Intermittently, but they never really stopped because it was still in conversation as a community. So this is how we started with baby steps. And then they started bringing in the case for us to work on it for 3 hours, and then they would take it back, very different from what it is today. Yeah. At the Criminal Investigation Resource Center. But then I'll have Chris talk about his idea when we were organized the cold case conference at the college, and how we actually got opportunity for funding. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So, I think partly to address the original question, a case like this couldn't be solved if the police didn't do a great job the beginning. And the preservation of the evidence is the real key to this case in the end. And there's other cases that we've been involved in that didn't have this level of evidence that we've been able to push along too. There's other ways to do it, but the preservation is a big deal. And the fact that 60 years ago they had the foresight to preserve it, and that it sat, and that they saved it, and that they preserved it well, so that we could get the DNA in the end, really saved the day, basically. And then the technology just advanced. As Tina was saying, that if they had the technology that we had today, they probably would have solved this within that year,
Like that,
right?
yeah.
It was kind of shelved and just waiting for the right eyes and the right opportunities and the right funding and all that. And that's where this whole team came in. There's so many people involved from step one to the last step to bring this across the finish line. That's really amazing. And I really just applaud Albany PD for taking all of those steps and reaching out to all those different players and having the foresight to get others involved. We, like Tina was saying, this was 2018 when we got going on this. We decided, we had started working on the case. The students were organizing the case, and I was working. I was vice president of the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases at the time, and we were talking about where we were going to do our next conference. And we had done a conference at Methodist University. It went really well, and then we did another one. It was offsite. It wasn't at a university, and everybody really liked it. We had done one at a university. I thought it was a good feel to have the university staff and the students involved. They had some interns at Methodist working on things like playing cards and kind of getting involved in missing persons things. We decided that Tina and I to take things to the next level and have students working more closely on the case and helping organize files and doing whatever they could research-wise to bring the case along. So we decided to have the cold case conference that year in 2019 in Albany, and so we organized that. We pitched the case. Tina and Melissa presented the case to it was the case consultation team at the time, and just generated some ideas. And one of the big ideas that was mentioned was the MVAC. And actually, the owner of MVAC was at the conference. He brought the MVAC with him. Jared was there, and there had been other cases that have been advanced with MVAC. MVAC was, not fully well established, but becoming more established in the field, and it was really groundbreaking science. So we then turned away from that conference, kind of went on our way researching different potential links between the Blackburn case and other cases potentially in the area. Weren't really getting very far in that regard. And we started talking to Albany PD about testing some of the evidence and taking some of the scientific suggestions that came from some of the forensic science people that were at the conference. And then we decided that in order to do that, we're going to need money. Albany PD just wasn't going to have all the money they were going to need. And we started looking for sources. We raised some money through ASOC. I was then president of ASOC by that point, and went to the board and said it would be a good, for ASOC to do some donations to move the testing along. We engaged Susanna Ryan through Pure Gold Forensics, and Susanna has her own Ryan DNA from California, and she does the MVAC. So we first engaged her to do the MVAC and raise money through ASOC, St. Rose, and Albany PD put in money. I think there was another source too, but and we did the MVAC, and we got a John Doe DNA profile from an item that we thought was going to be pretty key, and that was the handkerchief, the piece of cloth that was found underneath the victim, that we presumed was a handkerchief-like size cloth probably came from the perpetrator, probably dropped during the act. It was underneath her body. It was kind of foreign to the scene. It wasn't something that
Wasn't
technically would have been
supposed to
there.
be there.
So it was, from my perspective, behaviorally, it seemed like it came from the perpetrator. That was our best bet to get something. And then potentially other things he may have touched, like her underwear, and then some of the other.
That's what I was going to say. There was a sexual assault, but obviously at
Right.
this
I
point,
think there wasn't sexual assault this case.
no.
It's assumed, but there is no clear proof that there was.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Thank you,
There was
Tina.
so back then they did what they called an acid phosphatase test. They didn't find semen, but they found the likelihood that there may have been sexual contact or there may have been semen that degraded. And so they didn't find semen or sperm heads, but they found what was probably
It have
likely
been, yeah.
a sexual assault, right? And then given the other aspects of the scene, how she was found, it was clear that it was sexually motivated, but there wasn't necessarily, overt signs of penetration.
Well, I've learned from talking to both of you that sometimes a crime can be sexually motivated without an actual sexual act. So.
Right, correct. And that's what really became part of the profile, was that this is a fantasy-driven offender, regardless of whether he penetrated at the scene. There was a very deep fantasy base to the way he went about offending. So that helped with the profile and actually helped lead to the identification of Nowakowski. So after the testing, there was a clear John Doe profile. We had some potential suspects at that time, and we started doing the familial searches, and we actually compared a few familial swabs from people who were already in the file, who were suspected, and ruled those people out. So
I was going to say, so was he a suspect or no?
His name was only in the file once, in the funeral registry.
Wow.
That was the only time he was ever mentioned, or so he was not a named suspect, nor was there any.
Well, and you always hear that the cops kind of stake out the funeral just in case, because often offenders do like to see whether it's the mourning or the, this is what I've done, or, kind of just that cockiness of, I'm right in plain sight.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily, that's more a cliche. I think it's a very unique type of offender that would want to attend such an event. It shows their level of what the word, Chris, darkness maybe, and hearing and watching people mourn. So that's a special individual.
He certainly was, as we found out. But I mean, and as we profiled, right, we had the inkling that he was a serial predator, that he was likely either convicted or suspected in cases that had a similar offense pattern, a burglary, sexual motivation, probably a physical assault, that there may be signs of necrophilia, because there was in Blackburn, that he may have killed before, or at least broke in for the purpose of committing a sexual offense, and perhaps been interrupted, or any number of things, which came true, right? when we
I was going to say, which we found out.
So we identified the John Doe profile. We did compare to suspects, and then things kind of went quiet, and because the sample wasn't matching to any of the known suspects, we had to go the genetic genealogy route, which took several years.
Do you remember when, like year-wise, you got the genetic profile?
Well, what happened is, of course, we had to raise more money. So, so I saw through Chris, I think, I can't say we spent, but I think it was close to $20,000 in the end of everything. So what happened was during COVID, we still kept moving forward on the cases, which was wonderful that we had that opportunity because Albany PD said, "Ah, COVID, we're done," right? So you never know. So
Yeah.
so we had a retired FBI investigator come into the classroom, and he connected us with the FBI and let us know that the FBI offers funding sometimes to test items for police agencies, or they would do the genetic genealogy. And so the process is that you have to apply. And then when you apply, it's seen every 6 months, the case, and they decide what can we do. That's when, Melissa, we had the two cases. We had the baby Moses case, and then we also had the Blackburn case. And the baby Moses, since it was a baby, that's a no-brainer, right? That's technology solved rather quickly. And because of that, the FBI said, yeah, we'll pay for what you would call a SNP. Actually, they did the whole thing, SDR, then SNP for genealogy,
Sequencing.
the sequencing, and then they did the genealogy for baby Moses, which ended in conviction. Melissa also applied to the FBI aware of this networking for Blackburn, but the FBI came back. Well, we were already in the process during this, put a request for funds to Seasons of Justice at this time, right? While we're waiting to hear back from the FBI. So the FBI came back and they said, hey, we'll do the genealogy, but we're not going to pay for any other testing. So because of that, we luckily got the money from Seasons of Justice. It was like $9,700, which was terrific. So, well, hey, we can do the SNP. So because of the FBI, we were able to work with another lab besides Bodhi or Parabon. It was Othram. And
Okay.
Othram is very well known in the nation for working with degraded DNA. So the FBI delivered the item, which Chris talked about, the handkerchief, to get tested. And then they moved over with the genealogy. So that took some time. We knew it was a viable sequencing to test and move forward on this. But also to note is that because of the deductive reasoning, hats off to Chris, there were other John Does identified within the case. And even though it's in 1964, there is event or possible contamination of the evidence. So the handkerchief was one of, I think, 4 other John Does. And because of the behavior evidence analysis that, Chris Kunkle, deducted and yeah, what he did is that made the most logical sense. You can't, when it comes to evidence and testing evidence, as you can tell, it costs a lot of money. You can't just go, I feel it's this,
It looks like
you
you're
know,
going eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
or I had a dream, it's item
Yeah.
15, it's
You have
not
to
that.
really
It
make
is.
it
It's
make
from
sense.
the experience, the studying, the practical experience that Dr. Kunkel has. I'm sure he'll add to it. But that he was able to deduct and identify the handkerchief is our best bet. And it was, and it made sense. It's not likely for contamination because it was found underneath the body. It looks like it was dropped in the process because he did move the body, the perpetrator, so it does make sense that it was an accident that fell because he was particular in taking certain items from the apartment, including the murder weapon, because he brought that with him, which we've learned for sure later on, identifying him. So back to Seasons of Justice. So we got the funding for Seasons of Justice, which was terrific. So Albany PD sent it for SNP, we pay that. And then it took about, knowing about the time frame, and you kind of lose time, it took 18 months for them to do the genealogy and identify. And this was all a process. It's kind of funny when it comes to genealogy. They, with the tree, you get this family tree and you get a starting point. But with trees, you can go to the left or you can go to the right. Well, this time went left, so we had 3 stops before you had to identify. So coordinating with Albany PD and other police agencies in the country, they had to get other buccal swabs for comparison to confirm or let us know that we're getting close.
But this
Or
match,
making hit.
right?
Yeah. And then what Albany PD did is they gave us the familial names, and then we started digging and getting as much background we can based on each branch. We did find interesting lineages, but we knew based from what Chris was talking about from Pure Gold Forensics that the descent could possibly be Polish.
Okay.
So we started from there. Chris, do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of the deductive, if you go just back to basic crime scene training, which is where I go with this stuff, you can't test everything, like Tina was saying, and you do have to be selective just when you're processing evidence. Back in the mid 90s, when I did my crime scene training and I trained at the lab, we were making decisions about which items to test, which items to process, which items to keep bagged, you know, and you're testing certain areas of items. So all that goes back, feeds back into the behavioral analysis. And so when you have multiple profiles and you're trying to pick which one to go to the next step with and where to spend your resources, you have to make those determinations. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes you're wrong, right? But in this case, we weren't. And when you go down these branches of the tree, right, you're looking for people who would fit the profile. And this person comes up and you say, well, he's twice removed. He's in the age range. He lived in Albany.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, that you obviously had to see, like, geographically what made sense, age-wise, all those things.
Right. Were they already in the file? If they weren't already in the file, did they live nearby? Could they have been in Albany at the time? Were they even alive? You know, yeah. Were they deployed? Were they married? So that we're seeing people, you know, as we were getting information that just didn't fit the profile, right? They were the right age, but there wasn't anything in their background. So when they hit on Nowakowski and his background, it was clear that this is where we were going and this is where we're going to spend more resources. Because it's really hard to make the case that you need to exhume somebody and get their DNA.
Yeah, without some really solid evidence.
you have a 6th generation link to them through DNA. It might be them, but when you look at what surfaced about Nowakowski, both prior to the Blackburn murder and then after the Blackburn murder, it was clear that he was very likely the perpetrator. And what we needed to do was get his DNA and compare it directly. You know, those, when you see the pattern and the pattern fits, I mean, several of those crimes just, you could have written them into the profile. It fell directly in. It was really kind of cool to see that the deductions were true. And
I mean, just
right down to when he got arrested in 73, after he had attacked a woman in 73 in her apartment. He fled that house. She lived, but was badly beaten in a very similar manner to Blackburn, not stabbing, but beating with a hatchet. He was intoxicated, which was part of the profile, that he would get intoxicated and commit crimes. And that led back to Blackburn stating that when he came to the house that he smelled the booze. Like, there were just things that we knew he was doing to facilitate his offending. He had committed burglaries prior to the murder. He committed another burglary, which was probably meant to include a live victim, but she wasn't home, back in '66. And there's probably other cases.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like there are probably things that aren't linked to him just based on his pattern and the fact that he was able to go unknown for so long.
Yeah. Well, we know he's offended in at least 2 jurisdictions, right, in the capital region. But, you know, you go back into the 60s and 70s, those jurisdictional lines are a lot stronger than, they are now. Things are much more blurry now. There's a lot more communication. There's a lot more press. You know, if you didn't read both newspapers in 1973, you wouldn't have known.
You didn't know.
Either of those cases,
Yeah.
existed. So the links weren't there. You know, we often think of these cases through modern technology, and there's so much information out there on a daily basis that you almost overlink things because there's too much information. Whereas back then we were underlinking things because people just didn't.
Yeah, they didn't know. Had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
And also to add, Melissa was part of all this, and in the discussions, and lots of discussions, and we didn't go, aha, it's the handkerchief. It was, we looked at a lot of things and a lot of talking, amongst us, and figuring out it's not as simple as it comes across.
Yeah.
It's a lot of analysis, going back and staring at the crime scene, arguing over the shoe was that way. No, the shoe was this way. I think he must have touched it. No, no.
Well, I think that shows
And,
just
Melissa
with,
was part of this.
yeah, just with you guys being involved in the case for 7 years and having it, active and looked at for that many years before that. I think it shows that there was clearly a lot of thought and decision making gone into this, and what you guys sat down to do really was groundbreaking. I had a question about what we talked about in the beginning, kind of what the students were able to do. Like, here's the case for 3 hours. Were they able to help once you had the John Doe sample and kind of piece through the trees with you, or was that all you guys?
So the students, what they do is we guide them, and we give them assignments and work to do. And then the end product, each case is unique and different. So I can't give you like a recipe, this is what we do. And so with Blackburn, it was the students helped put together the PowerPoint in a sense, because the police would give us 3 hours. So I divvied up the case amongst everyone and say, summarize these 5 pages. And then we were able to and then they sent me the summary, and then we were able to create the PowerPoint in time for the cold case conference. It was a way of negotiating time. And Melissa would sit there and go, yeah, no problem, and share the photographs so we can put together, that PowerPoint for that, to try to get funds through that presentation and evaluation to the committee. So the students are given projects. So, but when it gets to a certain level of behavior evidence analysis, that's when, Chris, Melissa, and I come into play. It's not something that we can say the students picked it up. You know what I mean?
You need that level of expertise for sure.
That's when they start learning. I mean, they're sitting and listening to those conversations, and many of them are brought in, to those discussions just to hear how we're going about it. And the really cool thing that I think the students do, and I've probably said this before, they make all this material so much more accessible and quickly accessible. So when it came to comparing and ruling out certain suspects, we had whole files on suspects because they had created them, and you could word search for suspects, and you could dig down deeply. And when we were having these discussions about what position was the shoe in, or who said this, we can go back to that material and not have to read 1,000 pages to find it. And without them doing that hard work to get the file into the state it's in, and without Tina prodding them to do that work to get the file to the state it's in, they're learning that organizational skill that keeps the case moving along and allows someone like Melissa, who's busy as hell, working on other things with Albany PD, to move in and out of that case when the case heats up and when things need to get done. You can move into it, find out what you need to find out, get an application for a grant done, get a discussion done with a forensic scientist because you need an item tested, and then you move ahead. Or when you get to the search warrant for the exhumation.
That's what I was going to say, or file for the exhumation.
Right.
Yeah.
All the material there.
Put that together. So and so what it is that we get something, we work on it, we talk to the police, the select students that are working on a particular case sit down and they learn, they are part of it. And then okay, we need this information, so I'll give them requests. I need this done. But the stressful part of it for the interns, they're not students, it's not a course. When a case gets hot, we need it like in 2 days or even that same day. I need, here you go. It can get stressful for them.
That's so good for them to learn, to work in the real world of, hey, this case is like you said, this case is heating up. We need this now. We've got to file this to the judge. We've got to go, these things need to be submitted. This grant has a deadline. It's such good real world experience for them.
It's important with momentum, because when police have that moment, when Melissa goes, okay, I'm ready, I'm coming in,
Yeah.
it's like, we gotta get stuff ready for her. And she
Yeah.
loves it, because I get it to her like within the same day, and she's laughing, like, this is awesome, because, one level, it doesn't happen in real world, having that, that quick return, but it keeps the case alive, that momentum that we provide for the police. They get the information the same day, goes, oh, there it is. I can keep going because I have the time.
It doesn't feel like it's 6 decades old.
Yeah, and the students are the ones that make it so, make it energized, and make the police agencies get excited and want to get things done. I'm not saying that they don't want to, but it's just going with the momentum.
It gives that little push. Yeah. Like, hey, we're excited to get this done, and look what we did for you. Now it's on you.
Yeah. And Janet, you make a good point. Like what you just said, it doesn't feel like it's 61 years old. Like it didn't. It really, there were times when this case felt like it happened yesterday. We couldn't go.
You were that deep in it.
Right. But it was very active, live with evidence, everything that would have been there, except for being able to reach out and interview suspects. Right. All the other elements are there, and the science is just amazingly developing along the way.
Well, I think that speaks to the question that I said I wanted to address in the beginning of how was it possible for this to be solved? I mean, this whole conversation explains that, of all this collaborative work and the steps that needed to be taken. But I also think, the fact that this case was never really cold. We hate cold cases. I know this case it was unresolved, but it wasn't cold. It was active. You go to look for the case file. Oh, somebody's already got it. Like, what? That had to be great to hear all those years later, that it's still invigorated by new people. I'm sure, I can't imagine how the Blackburn family feels. I hear so many times that these families of missing or of unsolved cases just feel so forgotten. And it's like, no, you have no idea. Like, there's a whole, sometimes there's a whole group, a whole collaboration working behind you. So it's just good I like to bring these things to light and show that, these things can happen. People are working on it. People care.
Yeah. And not every case is in the condition this case was in. I mean, I've seen some doozies over the years.
Well, the fact that the evidence was preserved is just crazy.
It's amazing.
And for the openness too. Albany PD was open, and actually having this kind of coalescing and, okay, let's look into that. And they did. They followed through on things. Instead of saying, well, I got this stuff, let's wait. And then what happens with the wait, it gets larger, but there was never a wait. Melissa made things happen. Even though she's always called it a slow burn, when you really look at it, once we actually got together, that was like the end. It was December 2018. So we can even go as far, it took us 6 years as being open with advanced technology and COVID, so it's really exciting that we were able to get this process, and with the wonderful ending. I'm sorry, I'm pausing. It's funny with these cases. I can't say it's a wonderful ending, but because it's still sad, because the families really have to heal. So it's a momentary conclusion and moving forward onto other feelings.
And I think you could see, I know they all have different last names, but the family of Catherine, that they were so grateful. They just, sometimes I feel like when it's been that long, you just want to know, like, yes, it doesn't stop the pain. It doesn't stop the fact that you lost your loved one, but at least now there's not that question. Now, like you said, you move on to other feelings, but you don't have to wonder.
Yeah. And in all my years, I've never heard a family member tell me that finding out made them feel worse.
Yeah.
right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily make you feel great, of course, but it it never makes you feel worse. You at least have an answer.
It's a
Um,
step, yeah.
and it's struggling with some of these cases for years. You just want to bring them to a close, right? You want them to know you you could be close. If you just had one more step, and what Tina just said about Albany PD, just keeping their foot on the pedal, right? Just staying involved. There's so many cases where I've worked over the years where we've done some work, handed the police agency a report that says, these are some things to follow up on, and they, for whatever reason, don't do it.
Yeah.
And that some of the experts I've worked with, that's frustrating to them, and it's just part of the work. And sometimes
you really have to be
agencies want to
committed
follow
to that.
through, and Albany PD did it on this one, and they really invested in it. They kept it moving. They stayed motivated, and I do think what we do helps with that, because we stay involved, and it sits there. It's on the shelf. It's just ready to be pulled off, and you just don't always have the time to actively work it, but it's still being worked. And you
Well,
can
it's
just
like that
move in
that
and out.
extra layer of accountability, when you guys are giving them something to deal with, and especially since they were already working on the case, it's like, okay, well, now if we don't do anything, we're the ones that drop the ball. But I think something you touched on, like that collaboration, is so important, that you really have to be committed to the collaboration, because I don't think this case would have had the result, at least not now, that it's had, without all the players that were involved.
Very true. And the thing is that I think with these unresolved cases, I think organization is key. Because when you look at these boxes and they're organized by date, not a narrative, it's a lot of work. I work, and Chris too, we work in getting this into something that's easy to consume and understand. I don't think anybody would want to be handed over 10,000 pages and go figure it out.
Yeah.
You don't have the time with
Here, I
today's
highlighted some things.
Yeah,
And
exactly. So that, I
and
think that just
yeah,
motivates them to actually just look at the table of contents and go, I know the case. I can tell what the case is by just looking here.
Right.
But there's a lot of work that's
yeah.
involved in that.
And part of that vision was because I'd been through that. I've been handed boxes of documents and said, "What do you think?"
I mean, I saw
I'll
that
see.
on one.
I think I'll see you in about 7-8 months when I finish reading it all. It's a lot to wade through. There's duplicates, and it's a lot to keep in memory and organize. And that the way that I think it's evolved over the years, and Tina's been the biggest player in this. The way the case is organized has a system to it, and that system is multi-user friendly. Whereas what often happens in any case, the lead detective organizes the case how he or she feels best serves their brain, and we all organize things differently. I think the process that Tina's developed with case organization has made it so that multiple people with different ways of organizing can go in there. And the technology is advanced there too, with the digital imaging, so that it reads the file. It can read the page and code. Back in, I think Blackburn was one of these originally, where we were having students meta-tag pages with words so that we could get through the file. Kind of doing by hand things that technology does now. I mean, that technology has grown
Just that quickly,
8
right?
years. Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah. And not only the case organization, the police, once they see it, they love it. Also, district attorneys love it, because we save them, because they have to organize it for a case in court.
Right.
And then they see everything organized, and you're like, wow, you saved us months of preparation, and bringing
Clearly,
in other.
Killen was grateful.
Yeah, they get, and it's now we're starting to see, because officers are always saying, they also saying, oh, the DA loves the work you guys are doing. Thank you. Can you get this done like in a month for them? And you're like, okay.
Like, hey, we're working with you. But no, that's great. I mean, and I was so happy to see, obviously I know the great work that you both do, and I'm not the only one, but it was great to see the recognition that Cirque got in the press conference of announcing that this case had been solved. I mean, you were integral to solving the case. So I think it's proof that other, all agencies should embrace you with open arms because it works. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. But it's really amazing that you guys were able to be such a big part of this. And yes, 6-7 years, but compared to the 50 something that were before that, that's nothing. So that was awesome.
This is Still Searching.